What's up, everybody? My name is Brad, and today I've got another book review for you guys, and I'm going to be talking about Stormfront by Jim Butcher. This is book one in the Dresden Files series, and this is another audiobook I've listened to. And this one was narrated by James Marsters, I believe is how you say his last name. Check this out through my library app, like I've been doing with basically all of the audiobooks I've been listening to, and I've come to really enjoy the audiobook experience. I'm still fairly new to audiobooks. This is maybe only be my fifth audiobook or so. Before, I didn't think I'd be able to concentrate because I get distracted really easily. I thought I'd be listening and then 15 minutes later just not really comprehend what I'd been listening to. But that hasn't been the case. So like I said, I'm really enjoying the audiobook experiences. Let's go ahead and get into this book review. I'm going to go ahead and read the synopsis for you guys real quick, and then get into my thoughts and everything about the book. As a professional wizard, Harry Dresden knows firsthand that the everyday world is actually full of strange and magical things, and most of them don't play well with humans. And those that do enjoy playing with humans far too much. He also knows he's the best at what he does. Technically, he's the only at what he does, but even though Harry is the only game in town, business, to put it mildly, stinks. So when the Chicago PD bring him in to consult on a double homicide committed with black magic, Harry's seeing dollar signs. But where there's black magic, there's a black mage behind it. And now that mage knows Harry's name. So as you can tell from the synopsis, this is a bit different from a lot of the usual books I've been reading. If you've been a subscriber around here for any amount of time, for the most part, I read a lot of small press and indie horror novels. And while I love horror, you can get desensitized to that, get burnt out on it if you don't switch it up every now and then and read something different, whether it's just even a different format, poetry, or completely different genre, fantasy, sci-fi, thriller, whatever it may be. So this was something I want to switch it up a little bit. Really, I didn't know anything about the Dresden Files before I went into this, other than I knew that Harry Dresden, our main protagonist, I knew he was a wizard, but other than that, I didn't know anything about it. And I'd heard of Dresden Files before, but really the review, JP Pruitt, my buddy Pruitt, he did a video review on one of the Dresden Files books. It's been a little bit ago now, and I don't remember if it was this one or another one. But him talking about it actually made me want to read the series. And I'll put a link to Prue's channel down in the description. He's a super funny dude. Definitely go check his channel out and subscribe to him if you haven't already. So this was sort of a palate cleanser for me, going from really dark and sometimes bleak and not very hopeful horror books to this sort of fantasy. It was sort of reminding me of an adult Harry Potter mixed with like Supernatural or some other type of monster hunter. So it's sort of, it's not horror at all. It does have very slight, maybe horror type scenes in the book, but it's definitely not a horror novel by any stretch. It's sort of fantasy and mystery and detective, urban fantasy. It does take place in Chicago. And that's one of the things I liked about this. This would be a good entry point, in my opinion, for new to fantasy readers, or someone who's not sure if they are going to like fantasy and are maybe wanting to dip their toes in it. I think this first book would be a great starting point for people, because it does have a lot of real world things. It takes place in the city of Chicago, and there are, the police department's involved. There's murder and homicides. There's pizza places and cars and phones and record players and clubs, and there's the mafias involved and stuff. So it's very real world, but it's wrapped with these, or entwined with these magical elements, these more fantastical elements. So if it's something, fantasy is something you're not really sure if you would like to read, I think this would be a really good starting point. Also, to go along with that, the world building I really enjoyed. It does take place in Chicago, so there isn't a whole lot of world building. I think Jim Butcher did a good job of not just bashing you over the head with pages upon pages of histories and these past wars and all kinds of crazy stuff. There's bits and pieces of world building that I'm sure will be elaborated on more in future books. It talks briefly about the Never Never and the White Council and different magical entities. But like I said, it just sort of mentions them and talks about them a little bit, but it doesn't force that on you, doesn't try to cram that down your throat. It's sort of a building block. I feel like he's mentioning small bricks and pieces here, and that will be built upon down the line further in other books in the series. I don't know for sure, I think there's 15 books in the series, and 2 books are supposed to come out at the end of this year. I know that's another thing that a lot of new readers to fantasy feel daunted by. A lot of these fantasy series, there are these huge books, and they're all 10 book series and so on and so on. From what I can tell just from this first book, they seem to all be standalone. You can probably jump in at any book in the series and read it, and it will be a concise story for that one book. You'd probably get more enjoyment out of it if you did read them all, because I'm sure they do build on each other, but they do feel like standalone books. So I feel like definitely with this first book, I did have a complete arc. It had a complete story, where if you only read this book, you wouldn't be missing out on cliffhangers in the story or anything if you didn't continue on with the series. So that's another thing I enjoyed about it. Harry Dresden, he was a cool character. I really liked him. I like that he wasn't overly powerful or overly confident. I like it said in the synopsis. He sort of runs a detective, private eye type of business, advertising that he is a wizard, but his business sucks. He's late on his bills. He doesn't have much food to eat. His clothes are kind of outdated or not up to par with everybody else. And I really liked him as a character, that he had flaws from the very beginning, and I'm sure those flaws will be worked upon, and I'm sure he'll change as a character throughout the other books in the series. I also really liked sort of his companion, if you will, Detective Murphy. She was a good character. She was a strong female character, a kick-ass female character, and she was good opposition to Harry. He was sort of lackadaisical, if you will, and she's more serious and stern, where he's more of the comedic side to the story. And there were some funny moments in here which I enjoyed as well. But she has a relationship with Harry, and you can tell he's been a consultant with the Chicago PD for a while, and it seems like Murphy is really the only one who believes in that he is a wizard and sort of the magical side. Not the full extent of it, but she does call upon him when they come across cases that can't really be explained, like what happens in this book. There's a homicide that doesn't seem ordinary, so they call upon Harry to see if he can help determine if it was magical or not. So she does sort of believe in his magical abilities to some degree, and it seems like she's the only one. There's another detective, and I can't remember his name. It might be Murphy's partner, but I'm not sure. But he completely doesn't believe Dresden at all. He thinks he's a fraud, he's a fake. He doesn't believe in any of the magic stuff at all. So it was cool to see their dynamic, Murphy and the other detective, going back and forth in working with Harry Dresden. But there's lots of fun, fantastical elements in here. There's a character named Bob, and he's just basically a talking skull. I don't remember if it gave him a specific sort of entity name, but he maybe is like a spirit or something trapped inside of a skull. He was a really fun character. And there's other characters in here. There's a vampire. There's demons in here and fairies and so on. So it does pull in a lot of those magical elements, which I enjoyed. The scene with the vampire, this isn't really spoilers, but the scene with the vampire might be one of my favorite scenes in the entire book. It was super well done. And I said this isn't really horror at all, but it does have small horror aspects. The vampire scene was more horror. Just the description of it, it wasn't your typical vampire, definitely not a glitter vampire, but it wasn't just a human like Dracula. It had the human facade, but underneath of it, it had this bestial, really savage, vampire creature that I really enjoyed. That's one of the more well done vampires I've read in a story. It reminded me of the vampires from the Witcher mythology. A lot of those are more bestial and animalistic and look more like bats than just really pretty humans that tend to mesmerize people and so on. But overall, I don't really want to give too much of the plot away. There are sort of different storylines that Harry Dresden is working on, different sort of jobs he gets. See, like I said, he's sort of a detective wizard, and all those storylines, the plot threads, they all ended up tying up nicely together by the end. I really enjoyed it. His enemy, the foe, was enjoyable. The antagonist, who is, like it said in the synopsis, this black mage, if you will, that was a very interesting character. What their motivations were, why they were doing what they were doing, and so on, was enjoyable. And like I said, it was all real world stuff, but mixed in with this magical, fantastical twist to it that I enjoyed. So yeah, that's all I really want to say about it. The writing was good. The dialogue was very snappy and smooth and clean. I really liked the dialogue in the book. And the narrator, James Marsters, he did a great job. If I ever were to read a physical book, I think I would have that guy's voice in my head for Harry Dresden's voice. So overall, yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was a great palate cleanser, sort of fantasy, pulpy, magical, entertaining, fun, blast of a ride. Not something you had to think too deeply about, which was a nice change of pace. Overall, I gave it 4 stars, and I'm really looking forward to book 2 in the series. I already have it on hold with the library app. It's called Full Moon. I don't know what the synopsis is, but just from the title, I'm going to probably safely assume it is about werewolves. So I'm looking to getting into that one whenever it becomes available. And like I said, I'll definitely be continuing on with the series as long as the books remain enjoyable. The audiobook, it was only like 8 hours, so it's a short book. It's probably like 300 or some odd pages. So that's another good thing. Like I said, if you're new to fantasy, maybe wanting to jump in, they don't seem to be very huge books. At least these first couple don't. I think book 2 is like 10 hours, so still in the 300 to 400 page range. So they aren't too awfully big. Like the Song of Ice and Fire books back here, they're all 800 plus pages, 1,000 pages. So it's not a big time commitment either. Like I said, this has been Stormfront by Jim Butcher, book 1 in the Dresden Files series, and I gave it 4 stars. It was a really fun time, and I'm glad I decided to jump into it. Well, that's all I have for you guys today. So thanks for spending your time with me. Again, my name is Brad, and I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.